I started to deep dive into the privacy engineering landscape, and the two big buckets that I landed on were ensuring privacy with security and then ensuring privacy with AI. The idea was security is something that the world has been investigating for the past 2 decades. So now it was time to take a look into AI. The richer the data is, the better you can train the models. And after training, the ability to extrapolate from the data to generalize it to some edge case scenarios becomes better and better. We automate this pipeline with AI. No one has to worry about what kind of features do we need to protect or, let's say, eliminate out of a data set. We take care of it end to end. And secondly, without destroying the quality of information, the data is on parity level. Recently, we were featured in Gartner as the only vendor offering this solution in Asia Pacific.
You have just heard from Uzair Javaid, co-founder and CEO of Betterdata, a Singapore-based startup that applies generative AI to create synthetic data that is privacy-preserving. This can be used to simulate what-if scenarios for analysis, remove biases from datasets, and enable open access to data with 100% compliance. So let us dive right in.
Good evening, Uzair. Welcome to the show and congratulations. You'll be in Tokyo and receive the Tokyo Financial Award. You got the silver medal and it's the only foreign company this year, I believe. So that's a great recognition and really happy to have you here today.
Thank you, Norbert. I think the team has done an incredible job to snag the second place award. Everyone at Betterdata has been hard at work. And I think this just acts as a strong validation point for us that whatever we are building has local as well as global relevance. Plus, it's my first time in Japan, so quite excited to be there.
Sometimes when you see a company name, you scratch your head and you wonder what the hell are they doing? And with you, it's very easy. So you're doing Betterdata, and what does that mean exactly? And what problem are you solving?
So I think the philosophy for us being the company, the idea was for any situation where data is being used, it can face a couple of challenges in regards to its quality, quantity, as well as privacy risks. So the idea was to create a platform where anyone having real data facing challenges around these lines, the idea was for them to use this platform and be able to get hands on better data. So if it was a quality issue, we improve the quality in our synthetic or artificially generated data sets. Similarly, if it's a quantity issue, what we do is we take limited real data and give you unlimited synthetic data out of it. So now you have more coverage or more information that you can extract from the data itself. And ultimately, with the increasing digital footprint that we have, data privacy risks are increasing by the day. And recognizing that we have more than 120 countries who have passed some form of international privacy law. And that is where any company who is storing or handling a lot of sensitive data, when they store it, move it, or use it, they have to protect it. So with privacy laws, if they start misusing the data or mishandling it, they can get potentially fined heavy or big sums of amounts. And with our platform, the idea is you can use it and not worry about these kind of risks. So previously, the company had to worry about, let's say, 50 or 100 plus regulations around the world. And suddenly now you have this technology, which gives you the ability to worry about none of them. So now you can freely move your data and unlock your data assets while driving new revenue streams as well as optimizing your current processes.
The classic use case of that would be if I make a change to a system and I want to test with production data. What I typically do is then take a copy, maybe yesterday's backup, restore it into a test or QA environment and run it there. Even worse, maybe I have also in the development environment, and suddenly kind of all this sensitive data spread throughout the organization. So that's ultimately maybe the classic scenario where you come in.
Absolutely. So within a company, you have production stage environments and non-production stage environments. Data from production stage cannot be shared with non-production teams, mainly because of confidentiality reasons, competitive advantage, locality issues, data localization, privacy laws, all sorts of regulations as well kick in here. Either you don't have access to it, or you can get access to it after going through a lot of technical and legal controls. And the worst part is what you get, the anonymized version. So let's say if you had someone in production stage, someone's data, and there is the age column, and the customer was aged 25. So before I move it to non-production, I will start binning it. So instead of 25, it may become 20 to 30. You suppress information to preserve the privacy of the records. but inherently you are destroying a lot of quality in the data. And on top of that, it is super slow. We automate this pipeline with AI. No one has to worry about what kind of features do we need to protect or, let's say, eliminate out of a data set. We take care of it end to end. And secondly, without destroying the quality of information, the data is on parity level. What you get in production stage can now be replicated in non-production environments. There is negligible or minimal back and forth now between developers and the production team. And inherently, they can now replicate data products or innovation faster thanks to the advancements in AI and the platform we offer.
So when you implement this, there's still the initial point where you need to get access to the original data for the AI to learn about the shape and the distribution of the different data attributes, right?
Not really. As a startup, what we are building is a trust product. We are essentially tackling challenges around the data security as well as data privacy or privacy engineering as a whole. We pitch to a large enterprise, I mean, they would just say, you guys are small for us or too early for us, and we are not going to give you access to our data. We deploy our product on premise and we just walk away. So it is air gapped, means that it is not connected to the internet throughout the life cycle of the product use. Under no point we have access to any sort of data or nothing comes back to us. Real data stays where it is. On top of that, we provide them with the platform so they can train the models, generate synthetic data. And this synthetic data is what they can easily share now. They can either share with us for all sorts of reasons or any other vendor in the world to adopt new technologies or outsource data or different functions of the business units.
Even if you learn based on the original production data, the difficulty with that is always that you have certain edge cases that happen just very infrequently. Might be just once every 6 months because we have a coupon event on a bond or something. And so if you take a certain period and you use that to train the model, you might not have the instance of that business event actually included. Is there a way to address that?
It's a very subjective approach here because data itself is highly contextual. Now, in terms of replicating records which previously, let's say, did not exist in the real data, or maybe they did exist, but the data set we are training on does not have those edge cases. And depending on the quality of the data, it depends. Let's say if you have 1,000 records or 1,000 rows versus 1,000,000 records, and then for each of these records, how many type of features do you have? You can have 10 features or 10 columns versus maybe 100 features. The richer the data is, the better you can train the models. And after training, the ability to extrapolate from the data to generalize it to some edge case scenarios becomes better and better. A very basic example is we are building an account opening software for a bank, and all we have is customer data, and the age range here goes from 20 to 80. So that's the distribution, and we have the population residing in between. But suddenly I want to make my models more robust. I just want to test them so that tomorrow if someone inputs someone's age as 101, the system should not break down. Through the platform now, you have the ability to extrapolate data sets to simulate records of people who are aged 101, have a certain designation, income level, marital status, so on and so forth. Regardless of the number of features you have, whether they are 10 or 100, you have the ability to control the generation process and simulate records that previously did not exist in the real data. From there, you can extrapolate all sorts of scenarios. Think of it as a video game. You have the engine, and now you can design a simulation out of it. The same approach applies here. On top of that, the second challenge here is of outliers. So you have a lot of data, but sometimes you have outliers. Now that is an open research question. How do you deal with them? Typically what the traditional approach does is you get rid of them, train the models, and then generate. Because outliers do not have enough samples that give the models enough information. So overfitting happens because of that. And therefore, when you generate synthetic data, there is a high probability that they get repeated or they get replicated as they are. One way is, of course, the traditional approach. You delete them or get rid of them. And second is something that we are investigating at Betterdata is the concept of model robustness. You take these outliers and you introduce different perturbations in it. From a limited samples of outliers, you create multiple samples out of it. Then you train the models and you extrapolate from there. That's one of the many things we are trying out at Betterdata in hopes to not worry about outliers eventually.
So is what you're covering mostly structured data?
At the moment, our focus is on structured data, mainly because when we talk about privacy laws, they typically apply on two big buckets. So you have sensitive attributes like my name, house address, passport number, ID card, medical diagnosis, for example. And then you have non-sensitive attributes, maybe my age, sex, zip code. Privacy laws, they mandate that data with sensitive attributes, you have to protect it. They literally apply most where you have data in structured format. So when we look at large enterprises which have a dedicated data infrastructure, they typically have data warehouse teams. And for the business units, the data warehouse serves as the data provider. And more than 90% of the data there is in structured format. And then any business unit, be it marketing, sales, HR, consumer banking, they can just get the right data from the warehouse team and about their business functions. Our focus is on this mainly because of the macro trigger here, which is the increasing privacy laws. And in the future, our goal is to take on text as well as media data, so image and video. Ultimately, the plan is to have this platform which is data and AI and use case agnostic. Anyone from any vertical industry can just upload data in any format, and our platform will automatically pick the best performing model and give you synthetic data with quality that is as good as real, but at the same time does not have any privacy risks.
Excellent. Let's switch a bit to your origin story. Obviously, it's a very practical need. I've been a plumber building technology front to back application my life, and this is very much something that falls into the plumbing range for me. It doesn't sound very sexy, but given, as you said, privacy regulation around the world is getting stricter and stricter, something that's tremendously practical. How did you and your co-founder come up with the idea to build a business around?
My PhD has been all about the use of blockchain technology to design data privacy and data security techniques. For the major part of my PhD, I was operating under the assumption that blockchain is a secure technology. I built some techniques around it, but for my final project, I wanted to challenge this assumption as well, that for all these techniques that I made, the assumption was blockchain is secure. But what about the security of the blockchain itself? How do we ensure that it's really robust? That's where I started to dive deeper and looked into how private keys or wallets are generated on a blockchain. One of my projects was to then reverse engineer the encryption algorithm of the Ethereum blockchain. And by doing so, I got access to 670 user wallets live on the Ethereum blockchain. So I could just access them, siphon funds in and out, and pretty much just do whatever I wanted to do, which I didn't, of course. I documented ways to avoid that in my thesis. And from there, I started to scratch my head that encryption with all its mathematical guarantees and standardizations all across the world is good, but there has to be an alternative here, which offers better guarantees in a way that in encryption, if you lose the private key, then that's it, like your data is gone, you can't recover it. But how can we do something that where even if you lose access to something or if you leak the data, there is still no repercussions or consequences? I started to deep dive into the privacy engineering landscape. And the two big buckets that I landed on were ensuring privacy with security and then ensuring privacy with AI. The idea was security is something that the world has been investigating for the past 2 decades. Now it was time to look into AI. That is where I met Kevin, who's my co-founder. Kevin was at IBM, and his background has been all in generative AI. Or back in that time, they were called deep generative models. The keyword this year is generative AI. So that was his background. When we met, the idea of combined with AI, when we married it together, we landed on deepfakes. You may have seen videos on YouTube where people have changed their faces or they say something which they never did. So we've landed on that, but instead of doing image data, we shifted our focus to structured or tabular data, mainly because of the increasing privacy laws and their implications on structured data in any company that is storing these kind of things. That is how the genesis of our company came to be. And from there, we have been up. And like I said, starting from structured data, but eventually we want to cover all types of data as well.
Which stage are you as a company right now in terms of, one, you see the company size, how many employees or people do you have working, even if they're full-time, and what is the state of funding for you?
We are currently raising our seed round. That's where we are at the moment. In terms of our beginning, we started in May 2021. We are based out of Singapore, but it's a remote first culture. We have 7 full-time employees based in Singapore and a few other countries in Asia. At the moment, we are closing our seed round, and going forward, the idea is bring further maturity into the product, as well as expand our portfolio of use cases in Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific. Recently, we were featured in Gartner as the only vendor offering the solution in Asia Pacific. So the idea is to establish our footprint here first, and then take it to the West when the time comes.
In terms of initial client engagement, customers where you're allowed to disclose, how did this work out now? Basically, the idea hits the reality of an organization, and what were some of the initial experiences that things really worked well and maybe even better than expected, and some of the teething problems that you naturally have when you start up?
When we started from a product perspective, the angle was, of course, to double down on our strengths, which was the angle of AI with privacy. Now, our belief was around synthetic data to enable companies share data easily. And back then, when we started, we just wanted to go out there and validate the proposition if it made sense. We started to speak with a lot of data science teams, mainly through our network. So people who had in our social networks, we reached out to them, had candid conversations of how they're doing stuff, and then what are some of the challenges. And speaking with a lot of folks in financial services and healthcare domain, they all resonated with the same pain point. I still remember a conversation where a healthcare professional said he had to get access to healthcare data. It took him 12 months, and it was an Excel sheet which had 65,000 records or so. But to get access to that data was such a hindrance that by the time he got the data, he had lost interest in the project he was doing. The idea was, how do we eliminate these technical and legal controls? We did this pull and push approach. So through our social networks, we spoke to the people who were the right kind of personas that we wanted to get feedback from. And the personas we were targeting was any data professional who is handling data in any capacity. Junior, senior, doesn't matter. We just want to understand for a company when they share data internally or externally with other companies, what's the process like and how they go about it. While we were doing this by ourselves, my PhD is from the National University of Singapore, and they have been incredibly supportful in terms of putting us in front of the right type of customers, as well as data science teams in some of the large enterprises in Singapore. So we use them to facilitate some introductions, gain more network exposure. Because as an early stage startup, sometimes the issue is your friends tend to just say nice things to you. They may be biased in some manner. It could become a case of false positives where everyone is just saying, oh, this is literally the next big thing. We wanted to de-risk that by speaking to some folks which we never met and get their thoughts to make sure that we don't land on something that is false positives. My school was NUS, and I'm still in touch with them. They keep facilitating introductions, which are quite helpful. My co-founder, Kevin, he's from another school, Korea University of Technology and Design. They're doing the same thing as well. This idea was to build this network in Singapore, which could first provide us feedback and validate the belief. And then from across all these conversations, how do we find that repeatable pattern where we say, okay, this is the product we want to build, and this is how it can help data scientists or data professionals when they're fetching data from one point and pushing it back to another.
So through this process, you have actual customers and you have already pilots in production.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, data is highly contextual. When people say data is the new oil, I like to correct them that information is the new oil. Data itself is useless. That is where the contextualization happens. A certain data set may save a lot of money for one company, but it won't do the same function for another. So it has some sort of localization element to it. That is where our angle is. Instead of focusing on the dollar value, our primary focus is to capitalize on customer learnings and what type of data they are working with, and what are some of the KPIs or functions that they want to go about. In the beginning, our approach was to do pilots with support from data science teams in enterprises. It could be paid or it could be free with marketing support. So they could shout our name off the rooftops to say what we are doing and just to spread the word around. So that's how we started to build our pipeline, working with the tier 2, tier 3 enterprises. At this stage, the pipeline that we are doing, most of them are concluding the pilots. And one of them is being converted this year. So we have verbal confirmation on that. This year, while we convert the pipeline, we use the learnings from those pilot projects to attract new customers. And instead of doing, let's say, free pilots now, the idea is to further bring maturity to the business model and push things towards generating more revenue.
Throughout all the conversations, you have built a very interesting matrix. It's a heat map, essentially, of where the best use for this technology is, whether it's internal to the organization, external to the organization, or even if internal, it's across business units or geographies. It's a very insightful piece, I thought. Can you just share where the hotspots of that is in terms of the application?
We have now to date conducted over 300 customer conversations across the globe, mostly focused on financial services, healthcare, tech companies, as well as public sector or government bodies or agencies. The bucket of use cases that I can summarize our conversations falls into three core categories. The first one is where a company does not have internal capabilities to use data to build data products, for example. Let's say the HR department in a certain enterprise would like to build an employee churn model to predict who's more likely to leave my company, and so I can focus on them to retain them. But inherently, they don't have AI capabilities in place. Naturally, they would like to outsource it to a vendor, any data analytics company. This type of data flow is typically locked because employee data is sensitive. Regulations don't allow this kind of data sharing routine. The use case is logged, data can be shared. The HR department is stuck with legacy software or processes, and that's it. We give them the ability to unlock their data and outsource it to anyone in the world. This is to generalize this argument. I, as a company, now have the ability to work with any vendor in the world to drive any new solution or adapt any new technology. That's the internal, external data sharing use case. When we talk about internal data sharing, to contextualize here, since the award we got is on financial innovation. When we talk about financial services, most of the time they have a data science HQ team in some country in the world. Let's say in Asia Pacific, there is a certain insurance company with multi-regional presence, but their HQ is in Japan. Now, the data science team in Japan uses the data to come up with a new solution or product, but they have an office in Singapore as well. What gets done in Japan typically can't be replicated in Singapore because of data localization issues. Data can flow beyond borders. Whatever the team in Japan did, it has to be copy-pasted or replicated from scratch in Singapore. If you have a presence in 50 countries, you're looking at the complexity of that scale. Now, we as a company, we have multi-regional presence, so it makes sense that if a team comes up with the best solution, everyone else just copy-paste it to save a lot of time and doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. I can get data from all countries to the HQ. I can pull it together to create a master AI model or a master data product, and then push it back to all the countries so they can work with their local data using the same product that the HQ team came up with. This inherently becomes an internal data sharing use case. And the third spectrum that we look at is where data licensing, data monetization is picking up. End of 2021, we saw the Shanghai Data Exchange opening up in China. Telecom operators, we had airline carriers are trading data as similar to commodities. Marrying data across different organizations, let's say insurance companies, telecom partners, airline carriers, banks, to have a full customer 360 profile in order to offer them better personalization and recommendation services. And that is where it makes more sense. For example, I, as a telecom company, I can license mobility data of customers in a privacy-preserving manner, not in raw data format. Those kind of use cases is where you can bucket them under the license of data monetization, data licensing. That is the spectrum. Internal data sharing, it's low risk because everything is contained. External data sharing is high risk because data goes outside of my system. Once it goes through, I can't control it. That's high risk. Ultimately, we believe the tech works, but when we impart that conviction to customers, they can facilitate data trading routines, which are currently not happening, to drive new meaningful outcomes in terms of studying customer behavior across different profiles and channels.
Wonderful, thank you. That's quite a broad spectrum. And how do you price your services?
At the moment, all the customers that we are working with, they do not upload data to the cloud because public cloud platforms don't even sign NDAs. That's how bad it is. We deploy our product on premise and operate on licensing and support-based business model. That comes with its own setup cost. We typically look at a minimum licensing period of 6 months, and then, of course, 12 months to multiple years. Going forward, the idea is to look into framework agreements with our lighthouse clients where they can have the same pricing for multiple years. And ultimately, to make things more scalable, we are looking into some technologies to facilitate companies or to give them the confidence that they can upload data to the cloud. One of them is called confidential compute, which allows you to operate on encrypted data. Then it becomes a matter of scalability that I, as a company, can upload data to the cloud without worrying about huge costs or buying new servers if my data sets increase in size and scale. At the moment, primarily it's based on licensing. But in the future, to make things more scalable, we are also looking to see how we can enable customers move towards a SaaS offering where we can push things towards a subscription basis.
Japan obviously is a big market. It's the second largest market for technology in the world. You have expressed the interest in the market by applying for that Tokyo Metropolitan government program in the first place. For anybody who's listening to this, what are you looking for in Japan? Of course, for customers, but what would make sense in terms of a partner ecosystem type of conversation that people can approach you for?
At Betterdata, the platform we have built operates on structured data. When we talk about large enterprises, when we talk about system integrators, they typically have a data warehouse team, which is use case agnostic and business unit agnostic. The whole point for them is to make data readily available for all business units or teams to work with and drive about their outcomes. What we are looking for in Japan is, because coming from Singapore, the idea is to have a soft start. Once things take off, then we are more than happy to put more boots on the ground. To facilitate this soft start for us, we are looking for strategic partners, system integrators mainly, where they have a lot of interest or a lot of user base, which are capitalizing on data warehouse capabilities, or mainly driving a lot of data analytics solutions. When we talk about data analytics, then we have, of course, data quality, data quantity, data privacy risks. For any SI or for any enterprise which is offering their services to other clients, we can become an additional layer on top of it to facilitate their data sharing routines, make them privacy preserving, but at the same time, enable them to generate more data out of it. So primarily, we are looking for system integrators, and the keyword here is data warehouse teams. And in terms of end users, data scientists or engineering teams, which have to use data and, of course, drive about their business outcomes. So we are quite keen to have a conversation with them and see how we can help each other out.
Super cool. Really looking forward to seeing you in Tokyo and wishing you a safe trip. And thanks very much. Hopefully this helps a bit getting your message out in this market.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Norbert.